have played out any differently. If not for the pack of insignificant weaklings and their cowardly scheme that had sealed Mithra in this blue gemstone all those years ago, it would have long since scoured their ilk from the world. For an age, Mithra had dwelt on that thought. As long as the conditions were right, its Megto flame would ensure its victory over even a stronger specimen of its own kind. It was Mithra's ultimate technique, which had never failed to achieve its purpose, and if unleashed alongside a lethal Black's bolt just to be doubly, triply certain, then no matter the opponent, they would be reduced to ash. That was what logic dictated. Black bolt parry. How, then, was this man still whole? How was he still in one piece and not a pile of cinders? And how is he coming straight for me, looking like he does not ever care in the world? Was he truly pushing the flames aside with his sword? None of this made any sense. It was impossible. The man's body was swathed in fire, yet still, he drew nearer and nearer to Mithra. His skin sloughed away in sheets and turned to ash, only to grow back again and again as he closed the distance. And at the same time, he was still parrying bolts of black lightning. The man's regenerative ability was inexhaustible. But how? What had he done to gain such power? Just who was he? To describe him as an abnormality no longer sufficed. He was an abomination, one that should never have existed. No, be calm. This is not only that man's power but hers as well. Astera, the half-elf woman. She had reduced the potency of the flames and was assisting the man's regeneration. Mithra had kept her in this place for 200 years. Yet she had this much strength left in her. It had valued her blood and body quite highly, but evidently not highly enough. Still, Mithra did not let its surprise take hold. With this new understanding of the situation, it could no longer deceive itself. It was not powerful enough. Its strength had declined. This body would not last much longer. 20,000 years had passed since Mithra had been locked in here. It had already destroyed the function of the blue gemstone that had drained its power, converted it, and fed it into the dungeon, but not soon enough. Its body had deteriorated far too much as a result. At best, Mithra had only another 10,000 years left. No, in the worst case, only another several thousand. Its strength had waned more severely than it had imagined, but even then, its power should never have fallen low enough for insignificant humans to seize the upper hand. Mithra and its kind stood on a plane of existence far above humanity. Intelligence, technique, physical makeup, they were incomparably superior in every way. Burying two primitive humans should have been trivial. Even a negligible amount of effort would force them to their knees. So why is this happening? Black bolt parry. Mithra doubted its own eyes. How could this be? The next barrage unleashed from its hand contained not just lightning and flames but also a matrix of the most potent defensive barriers it could produce. The more power that was devoted to the creation of these barriers, the more resilient they became. And while Mithra's half-elf puppet could create barriers 100 times sturdier than anything an ordinary individual could muster, such as the ones it had placed on the route to the dungeon's core, even those paled in comparison to the ones Mithra's true body could produce. Mithra continued to form barriers, creating dozens each time the humans blinked. It was almost excessive, an absolute defense. To be sure, Mithra soon had around it a blinding fortress of azure light. Though it could not believe it had been forced onto the defensive in the first place, it was now completely safe. Not even 10 instances of its own Black's bolt, cast at their highest potency and unleashed all at once, would make it through the barriers. So how parry? How was this man smashing through them as though they were paper? Even with the flames searing his skin, he continued to advance, breaking Mithra's barriers by the thousands. His momentum simply would not stop. Unbelievable. Mithra could no longer retain its composure. Its barriers, created with techniques beyond the understanding of the current era, were being shattered one after another by a being of no consequence. As soon as it formed the next layer, the man's black sword had already shattered another several hundred. Mithra was losing what little ground it had managed to cling to. Who is this man? Who? Everything about him was sheer insanity. How had he even come to exist? No, it wasn't just the man. Yes, he was abnormal, but his sword was the true problem. It was the black blade, a relic recognized as the greatest of its kind, recovered by that fool of a king from the depths of the Dungeon of the Lost. How had Mithra overlooked it until now? Mithra suspected that a being of tremendous power was sealed within the Dungeon of the Lost in the same way it had been trapped here. That was precisely why it had eyed the black blade, thinking it was a burial item of the highest quality from ages past. It had been completely mistaken. The black blade was not the greatest relic in the world. Such a restrictive moniker did not even begin to describe its true worth. Its very existence was an exceptional outlier. Comparing it to anything in their current world was a ludicrous insult to its uniqueness. How had Mithra not noticed that until now? Indeed, the black blade existed on another level entirely, one so superior it could not be expressed through words. Mithra had heard of such items being created at the end of the Age of the Gods. As a final act of defiance, the insignificant beings of the past had made strange wonders, the likes of which had never been seen before. This was Mithra's first time laying eyes on one. And the more it studied the black blade, the more threatening the sword seemed. One needed only to look at the relic to know it could not be compared to any other. Even putting aside its many abnormal qualities, it was made of something that simply should not have existed. Ideal matter. 20,000 years ago, during the era now called the Age of the Myth, the insignificant specks had reached heights that had allowed them to defy those such as Mithra. Ideal matter was the crystallization of their entire civilization, the pinnacle of achievement that existed without peer. The material could affect anything else yet could not be affected in turn. Its very existence was contradictory. The black blade was the only weapon in existence made from this legendary material. It could oppose even a god, a being that was as conceptual as it was physical. So why was it here? The word peerless did not do the black blade justice. Even 20,000 years ago, when civilization had thrived, it had been said to exist in a league of its own. There was nothing a person would not cast aside to obtain it. Such was its preeminent worth. In this era, nothing could rival the black blade, so wielding it was akin to holding the entire world in one's hand. Mithra could hardly believe it had already been unearthed from its resting place. Yet the weapon was not whole. Even at a glance, one could tell it had sustained considerable damage, and its power had faded entirely. Because it had initially been of exquisitely delicate make, its functions had ceased. Now, its only notable quality was the contradictory material from which it was made. By all accounts, it should have been unusable in its current condition, unable even to be carried. And yet, Barry, how was this man wielding it without any issue? He should not have been able to swing it, nor even touch it, considering what it was made of. Yet he made it seem like the most natural thing in the world. It was insane. The man, the sword, the entire situation. Barry, the man's blade smashed through the remaining barriers, allowing Mithra's own black flames to seep through. Mithra was quickly enveloped in the conflagration, and its body burned. Unable to breathe air through its hollow throat, Mithra let loose a silent scream. 20,000 years had passed since it had last felt such agony, such unease, such confusion. This was wrong. No, it was impossible. At this rate, Mithra, holy Mithra, once said to be the closest existence to the gods themselves, would die at the hands of two primitive, inferior animals. Was this really the end? Would the last blow truly be dealt by this nobody who had appeared out of nowhere without word or warning? Mithra had never considered such an end for itself. How, Barry, how is this man's sword reaching me? Everything about the man was wrong. Everything about him was contradictory. He could use a sword that should not have been usable. He could react to lightning that moved too fast for the eye to follow. He could pierce through barriers that were supposed to be impenetrable. Then he shattered Mithra's jaw, which should not have been reachable. Mithra unleashed another soundless howl from a throat with no flesh to burn. How long had it been since it had last experienced this feeling, since it had last feared the unknown? At once, it abandoned its plans. This is it, the end. The future it had carefully laid out for itself had been changed, and there was nothing that could be done about it. No longer could Mithra leisurely chart out the steps of its resurrection. The being standing before it now had dragged it from its intended path. But even then, Mithra lamented what had slipped through its fingers. First, tyrants, Mithra had doted on the boy, eagerly awaiting the day he would become its new body. And what an exquisite body he would have been. He had finally reached an age when he was capable of propagation. And the exchange with Mithra's current puppet, Terence's mother, had been just around the corner. How vexing it was that the plan had been thwarted at the 11th hour. Second, Lindbergh. Mithra had been on the verge of obtaining her as well. She would have served as a mere backup for its new form, but her potential as a new mother body was immense. Through her veins ran blood of a rare and excellent quality. If only Mithra had been able to obtain it, the theocracy would have prospered even more. The addition of talented individuals to its ranks would have been guaranteed, with each one eventually becoming a fine vessel. But above all, its beloved holy theocracy of Mithra, the country it had made from nothing and where it was an object of worship. Mithra had gathered people from all over the great continent, created a doctrine to facilitate its eventual resurrection, and established political influence to support the religion that revered it. The population of the capital had steadily increased, setting the stage for Mithra's rebirth. Even now, though, there weren't enough people to create Mithra's flesh and blood, not enough to satisfy its hunger. The theocracy had to be nurtured for a little while longer. Patience would make the eventual reward so much sweeter. That was why Mithra had endured. So much had gone into its plans and schemes, all for that final moment of delight. To lose everything was truly regrettable. Mithra had devoted so much time to creating something special, only to see it all collapse before the finish line. Still, there was nothing to be done about it. As regrettable as it was, there was no sense in raging against the inevitable. Right now, Mithra's only focus was defeating the man, and unless it brought its full strength to bear, it would not win. This was the only option. Fortunately, there was still plenty of time, an eternity, even compared to the lifespans of worthless humans. Having to give up on roughly 200 years of progress and start again was unfortunate, but there was no need to be hasty. Mithra needed only begin again. As long as it survived, there would always be another chance. As the black flames continued to burn and rage, Mithra quietly accepted its fate. It was time to reap the rewards of seed sown long ago. This was coming a little earlier than anticipated, but that was all. Perhaps it was even a blessing in disguise. This version of the theocracy would serve as a mere rehearsal for when the new nest was established. There had been many events with which Mithra had not been satisfied, but this second attempt would provide a chance to manage things differently. Yes, this was necessary, inevitable, an event that could not be avoided, even if the outcome meant the annihilation of everything Mithra had made for itself. There had only ever been one way this was going to end. So why not raise a grand toast in celebration? Though it no longer had a jaw, Mithra threw back its head in silent laughter. In its throat, which was still at the mercy of the inferno, it felt the intense hunger and thirst it had endured for the past 20,000 years. And so, resolved to surrender everything it had worked toward, Mithra left the dungeon core. The gemstone had served as its prison for generations, but that was in the past. For a long time now, the only reason Mithra had remained within the core was because it had served as a convenient hideaway. Chapter 84, Between Mother and Son. Terence and I hastened through the darkness toward the deepest stratum where the core was located, mowing through an endless tide of monsters. When we reached a slightly more open area, the Holy Prince abruptly stopped and gazed at our surroundings. "Lin," he murmured cautiously. "Wait. What is it, Terence?" "Something's wrong. This area, there should be powerful barriers layered here to prevent intruders from proceeding any deeper. We shouldn't have been able to enter so easily." A closer look revealed a procession of massive furrows in the ground, likely impressions of the barriers that had once been there. Could the High Priestess have lifted them to pass? I asked. Terence slowly shook his head. No, she would have put them back up again. Something else happened here. I was about to respond when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. "Look further in. There's light." Taking care not to let our guards down, we advanced through the open area, and the moment we stepped out the other side, the presence of the monsters we had previously been fighting vanished entirely. The light I'd noticed was blue in color, and as we grew closer, it became more evident that it was coming from a crystal structure composed of interlocked parts of various sizes. That must be The dungeon's core, I murmured. I'd never seen one in person before, but there was no mistaking it. So it really is still alive. This core was much larger than any I'd ever heard about. I actually had to crane my head to take it all in. As I fell quiet, so, too, did our surroundings. Aside from us, there was nothing in the vicinity of the giant, glowing blue crystal. Nobody's here? Terence muttered. But wait, I warned. Over there. We both stepped back, distancing ourselves from the presence we could sense manifesting. Then, with the eruption of a flickering black inferno, a single woman burst forth from the darkness. It can't be. Is that Her Holy Highness? The person who had suddenly emerged from the blue crystal, wreathed in black flames, was none other than High Priestess Astera. Terence and I were frozen in shock as she alighted on the ground, calmly stood up straight, and smiled at us. My, she said softly. Terence? And Lindbergh too. Fortune must not have cast me aside just yet, for this makes 2 strokes of luck. The first was this body not being touched by the flames. The second was finding the 2 of you waiting here for me upon my egress. There was no doubt that this was the High Priestess, but reconciling that fact with her appearance was challenging. Black fire licked the air around her as she spoke, its heat so intense that it was melting the dungeon's nearby surfaces. Even her mithril weave robe, highly resistant to magic, was charred black and melted through in places. What could have happened to put her in such a state? I am overjoyed, Terence, the High Priestess said. Just when your mother was facing a predicament, you came running. Well done. I am delighted that the 2 of you are here. I was struck speechless by the gentle smile she wore. The unnatural black flames cloaking her were unmistakably the product of a horrifyingly vast abundance of mana. They were burning her skin even as she spoke. It was unthinkable that she wasn't in pain. How could she simply smile like that? Taking in the sight before me, I felt my suspicions had been confirmed. Something was wrong with the High Priestess. As she stood there, her expression unchanging, my back stiffened almost on its own, and cold sweat trickled down my cheeks. Mother, Terence said in greeting. The High Priestess turned her soft smile to the Holy Prince. Her expression wasn't human. Every instinct in my body screamed that at me. And Mother? It made no sense. How could Terence address the being before us by that name without hesitation? One thing was becoming clear to me, though. I now understood why he believed that his mother needed to be killed. Mother, why do you look like? Terence trailed off. Did something happen here? I'm afraid to say that we had a burglar on our hands, the High Priestess replied. One who managed to sneak his way into the heart of our country. A burglar? Indeed. The man whom young Lindbergh brought along. He took advantage of his position as a guest of today's celebrations to sneak around and has proved to be a rather stubborn nuisance, enough to force me to take extreme measures. Still, he is no longer a concern. I've trapped them on the other side. The other side. And while I will not go so far as to say that escaping is impossible, it will take a significant amount of time. At best, all that remains is to acquire its flesh from the good citizens of Mithra and restore its original power. Then, not even that man will stand a chance against it. I didn't have enough context to understand much of what the High Priestess was saying. Still, my heart was pounding so rapidly that it hurt, and alarm bells were ringing violently in my head. She had apparently trapped them, but to whom was she referring? And what did she mean by acquiring flesh from the citizens? I had my suspicions, of course, but even considering them sent a shiver through me. Every fiber of good sense within me refuted them. Wait, I murmured. I'm cold. The chill I felt wasn't a temporary phenomenon. It grew more intense with each passing moment. Accompanying it, a mounting sense of dread sent goosebumps rippling across my entire body. Something was coming. Something unknown and unthinkably horrifying. The moment I came to that realization, the space around us